Cynthia stood at the edge of the forest, her hands trembling as she clutched a blood-stained letter. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the damp earth, her tears mixing with the muddy ground. The darkness around her seemed alive, whispering cruel reminders of her choices. Somewhere deep in the forest, she could hear the faint echo of drums, a sound she had come to dread. She whispered to herself, "How did I end up here? What have I done?" The memories flooded back, sharp and relentless. The village of Gaki, with its endless stretch of maize fields and the scent of fresh rain, felt like a lifetime ago. She thought of Jacob, the boy who had loved her like no one else ever had. His laughter, his patience, his sacrifices. And now, because of her, he was broken, perhaps forever. Cynthia closed her eyes, but the face of another man, Francis, flashed in her mind. The man who had given her wealth and a life of ease, only to snatch away her soul. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps startled her. Cynthia turned sharply, her heart pounding. She thought she was alone. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Then came a voice she hadn't heard in years. "Cynthia, is this where your choices have brought you?" Years earlier, Cynthia was just an ambitious young girl in Gaki. She was the daughter of farmers who could barely afford 3 square meals a day, let alone an education for their children. Yet, she had a dream. Cynthia wanted more. She wanted a life beyond the village, a life where she wouldn't have to toil under the sun for a meager harvest. Jacob, her childhood sweetheart, understood her dreams. He loved her deeply, enough to sacrifice for her. Jacob worked odd jobs and saved every penny he earned to send her to school. When Cynthia passed her secondary school exams with flying colors, it was Jacob who celebrated the loudest. When she got admission into the university in the city, he sold his prized motorcycle to pay for her transport and initial expenses. "Don't worry about me," he told her on the day she left. "I will always support you, no matter what." Cynthia hugged him tightly, promising to never forget him. But the city was nothing like the village. It was fast, glittering, and filled with people who seemed to have everything Cynthia ever wanted. She tried to focus on her studies, but her life changed one fateful evening when she met Francis. Francis was unlike anyone Cynthia had ever met. He was wealthy, charming, and confident. He drove flashy cars and wore clothes that sparkled in the sun. He spotted Cynthia at a campus event and was immediately drawn to her beauty and innocence. He pursued her relentlessly, showering her with gifts and promises. "I can give you the world," he told her one evening as they dined at an expensive restaurant. "You deserve better than the struggles you've known. Leave the past behind and step into the future with me." Cynthia tried to resist, thinking of Jacob and all he had done for her. But Francis made her feel like she was stepping into a dream. Slowly, his world began to pull her in. She started avoiding Jacob's calls. The gifts, the attention, and the allure of a life without struggle clouded her judgment. When Francis proposed marriage, Cynthia accepted, though guilt clawed at her heart. She returned to Gaki only once, to tell Jacob the news. The pain in his eyes haunted her, but she convinced herself she had made the right choice. Life with Francis was everything she had imagined, at first. Their mansion was filled with luxury, her closet overflowing with designer clothes. She traveled to places she'd only seen in magazines and dined with the elites of society. But beneath the surface of their perfect life lay a chilling secret. Late at night, Francis would disappear into his private study, forbidding Cynthia from entering. He was kind to her, but there was always an edge to his kindness, a silent warning not to ask questions. One night, curiosity got the better of her. She crept into his study while he was out, her heart pounding. What she found there froze her blood: charms, ritualistic symbols, and photographs of people she didn't recognize, all marked with red crosses. Francis returned before she could leave. His smile was different that night, dark, menacing. "You weren't supposed to see this," he said softly, stepping closer to her. Cynthia's life became a nightmare from that moment. The wealth she had once adored now felt like chains binding her to a monster. She realized the truth. Francis's riches were not earned, but taken, through sacrifices that came at a terrifying cost. Cynthia rose to her feet, clutching the letter tighter. The voice behind her stepped closer, revealing itself in the dim moonlight. Her breath caught. "Jacob," she whispered, her voice cracking with disbelief. His face was older, worn by years of hardship and betrayal. but his eyes still carried the warmth she remembered. "Do you regret it now?" he asked, his voice heavy with pain. Cynthia opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The drums in the forest grew louder, and she knew Francis's men were coming for her. She had one chance to escape. "Help me," she begged Jacob, tears streaming down her face. "Please. I made a mistake." Jacob's expression was unreadable as he stepped closer. Jacob stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. The sound of the drums grew louder, their rhythm urgent and menacing. Cynthia's heart raced as she reached out to him, her trembling hand brushing his. "Jacob, please," she whispered, her voice raw. "They'll kill me. I have no one else. I was wrong." Jacob's gaze shifted, his jaw tightening. "Wrong?" he echoed bitterly. "You didn't just make a mistake, Cynthia. You destroyed everything. Me, us. And now you want my help?" Cynthia sobbed, falling to her knees. "I know I hurt you, Jacob. I was blinded by greed, by promises I didn't understand. But if you don't help me, I'll die. Please." The forest seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with tension. Jacob looked past her, his eyes scanning the darkness. A flicker of something, pity, anger, or perhaps both, crossed his face. Then, without a word, he grabbed her hand and pulled her to her feet. "We need to move," he said curtly. "They're closer than you think." The two slipped into the dense undergrowth, their movements quick and silent. Cynthia struggled to keep up, her city life having softened her once strong legs. Jacob navigated the terrain with ease, his familiarity with the forest evident. Behind them, the drums grew chaotic, joined by the sound of voices shouting in the distance. Cynthia's chest tightened as the reality of her situation sank in. Francis's men weren't just looking for her. They were hunting her. "What will they do if they find me?" she asked breathlessly. Jacob didn't look back. "You don't want to know." They reached a clearing where Jacob paused, his ears attuned to the forest sounds. He motioned for Cynthia to crouch beside him. "Listen carefully," he said in a low voice. "There's an old shrine up ahead. It's abandoned, but it has tunnels leading out of the forest. If we can get there before they catch up." A loud snap of a branch interrupted him. Cynthia froze, her eyes darting toward the sound. "They are here," Jacob muttered, pulling her deeper into the shadows. The men emerged from the trees, their faces painted with eerie symbols, their eyes gleaming with malice. They carried torches that cast flickering light across the forest, their shadows dancing like ghosts. "Find her," one of them barked. "The master said she mustn't escape." Cynthia's heart pounded as she clung to Jacob's arm. He pressed a finger to his lips, signaling her to stay silent. The men spread out, their movements calculated and deliberate. One of them stopped, his torchlight sweeping dangerously close to their hiding spot. Cynthia held her breath, her nails digging into Jacob's arm. She could feel his muscles tense, ready to act if needed. The man lingered for a moment before moving on. Jacob exhaled quietly, then whispered, "We move now." The shrine was a crumbling structure, its walls covered in moss and vines. Jacob led Cynthia through a narrow opening, his movements quick and deliberate. Inside, the air was damp and smelled of decay. Cynthia hesitated, fear gripping her. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jacob didn't answer. He lit a small lantern he'd retrieved from his bag, revealing a winding staircase descending into darkness. "Down there," he said. "It's the only way out." Cynthia hesitated, but the sound of the men approaching spurred her forward. They descended the staircase, the air growing colder with each step. The walls seemed to close in, and Cynthia felt a wave of panic. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice cracking. Jacob stopped and turned to her, his eyes blazing. "You don't have a choice, Cynthia. You wanted a way out. This is it." As they reached the bottom of the stairs, the faint glow of the lantern revealed a cavernous space. Ancient carvings adorned the walls, their meanings lost to time. Cynthia's eyes were drawn to a central altar, where the remains of old rituals lay scattered. Jacob knelt beside the altar, searching for something. Cynthia stayed close, her nerves on edge. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. "After everything I did to you." Jacob didn't look at her as he replied, "Because no matter how much you've hurt me, I can't stand by and watch you die." Before Cynthia could respond, a voice boomed from the staircase above. "There you are." Francis's men spilled into the cavern, their torches lighting up the space. The leader stepped forward, a cruel smile on his face. "Did you think you could run from the master, Cynthia?" he sneered. "You belong to him now." Cynthia clutched Jacob's arm, her fear overwhelming. "What do we do?" she whispered. Jacob stood, his expression hard. "We fight." Jacob's words struck Cynthia like a thunderclap. Fight? Against Francis's men? They were armed, ruthless, and outnumbered them. Her knees felt weak, but Jacob's determined gaze anchored her. "Stay behind me," he said, gripping an old staff he had pulled from the shadows of the shrine. It was carved with strange symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. "Jacob, you can't fight them alone," Cynthia whispered, panic rising. "I don't plan to." His voice was calm but firm. "This place, this shrine, has power. They'll regret stepping into it." The leader of Francis's men stepped forward, his torch casting jagged shadows across the cavern. "Enough games. Hand her over, or we'll take her by force." Jacob raised the staff, his voice steady and commanding. "You've crossed sacred ground. Leave now, or face the wrath of the ancestors." The men laughed, their leader sneering. "The ancestors? You think your village magic scares us? Francis owns this land, boy. He owns her, too." As they advanced, Jacob slammed the staff into the ground. The carvings on the walls lit up, their glow spreading across the cavern like wildfire. A deep hum reverberated through the air, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The men hesitated, their bravado faltering as the cavern came alive. From the walls, faint, ghostly figures emerged, warriors from another time, their spectral forms shimmering with an ethereal light. They surrounded Jacob and Cynthia, their silent presence exuding a power that made even the bravest man tremble. "What is this?" one of the men shouted, his torch shaking. Jacob stepped forward, his voice rising above the hum. "This is the spirit of the land, the ancestors who protect the innocent and punish the wicked. You've desecrated their sanctuary." The leader snarled, masking his fear. "Kill them both," he ordered. The men charged, but the spirits moved faster. They darted through the air, their touch sending the attackers sprawling. The leader swung his machete at one of the apparitions, but the blade passed harmlessly through it. The spirit retaliated with a piercing wail that echoed through the cavern, leaving the man clutching his ears in agony. Cynthia watched in awe and terror as the shrine defended them. Jacob stood firm, the staff glowing brighter with each passing moment. As the last of the men fled screaming into the forest, the cavern fell silent. The spirits returned to the walls, their light dimming but not disappearing. Cynthia sank to the ground, her body trembling. "It's over," she breathed, tears streaming down her face. Jacob shook his head. "No, it's not. Francis will come himself now. He won't let you go that easily." At that moment, a deep, menacing laugh echoed through the shrine, sending chills down their spines. The flames of the torches flickered, then went out, plunging the cavern into darkness. "Jacob," Cynthia whispered, clutching his arm. "What's happening?" A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, imposing man dressed in flowing robes. His eyes glowed red like embers, and his presence filled the air with suffocating dread. "Francis," Jacob said, his voice tight. Francis smirked, his gaze fixed on Cynthia. "Did you really think you could run from me? My dear, you're mine. Body, soul, and everything in between." Cynthia stood, her fear giving way to anger. "I am not yours. You lied to me, deceived me." Francis's laugh was low and chilling. "Lied? No, Cynthia. I gave you everything you wanted. Wealth, power, a life you could only dream of. And in return, you gave me what I wanted. Stay away from her," Jacob growled, stepping between them. Francis raised an eyebrow. "And who are you to command me?" "A broken village boy who couldn't protect her before and won't protect her now." The air around them grew heavy, crackling with dark energy. Francis raised his hand, and a wave of shadowy force surged toward them. Jacob slammed the staff into the ground again, summoning a barrier of light that absorbed the attack. "You think you can stop me?" Francis sneered. "This shrine won't protect you forever. Cynthia is bound to me by blood. She cannot escape her fate." Jacob's grip on the staff tightened. "We'll see about that." Turning to Cynthia, he whispered urgently, "There's only one way to break his hold on you. The staff, it's connected to the ancestors. They can sever the bond, But you'll have to face them and confess everything. It's the only way. Cynthia's eyes widened. Face them? What do you mean? Jacob looked at her, his expression pained but resolute. You have to tell the ancestors the truth. Every lie, every betrayal. They'll decide if you're worthy of saving. The ground beneath them trembled as Francis advanced. Your time is up, he declared, his voice booming. Hand her over, or I'll destroy you both. Cynthia took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she reached for the staff. Jacob hesitated, then handed it to her. You have to do this, Cynthia. Trust in the ancestors. As she gripped the staff, a blinding light engulfed her, pulling her into a world of shadows and voices. The ancestors' judgment had begun. Cynthia found herself in a vast, endless void. Around her stood the ancestors, shadowy figures with glowing eyes, their faces solemn and stern. Their presence was overwhelming, pressing against her chest like the weight of the world. Why have you come before us? One of them asked, their voice echoing like 1,000 whispers. Tears streamed down Cynthia's face as she dropped to her knees. I have come to seek your mercy, she said, her voice trembling. I was blinded by greed and turned my back on those who truly cared for me. I betrayed Jacob. I ignored my roots, and I married a man who thrives on evil. I see now the cost of my choices. Please, help me break free. The ancestors were silent for a long time. Then one of them stepped forward. Freedom comes at a price. Are you willing to pay it? Yes, Cynthia whispered. Anything. Then you must sever the bond with Francis. The voice boomed. But doing so will cost you everything he gave you. Your wealth, your comfort, even your name in his world. Will you accept this? I will, Cynthia said without hesitation. The ancestors nodded. A surge of energy coursed through her, burning like fire yet filling her with strength. She screamed, and the void shattered around her. Cynthia awoke clutching the glowing staff. Francis stood frozen, his red eyes wide with fear. What have you done? He roared, lunging toward her. She raised the staff, and a beam of light shot from its tip, striking him square in the chest. Francis staggered back, the darkness around him unraveling like smoke. This isn't over, he snarled, his form disintegrating. You'll regret this. With one final scream, Francis vanished into the ether, his power broken. The cavern fell silent. The glowing symbols on the walls dimmed, and the spirits of the ancestors returned to their rest. Jacob approached Cynthia, his eyes searching hers. You did it, he said softly. Cynthia dropped the staff, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Jacob. For everything. Can you ever forgive me? Jacob's expression softened. Forgiveness isn't something you ask for. It's something you earn. But for now, let's get you home. Hand in hand, they walked out of the shrine, leaving the horrors behind. Cynthia knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years, she felt free. She had lost everything, but in the process, she had found herself. And as they emerged into the light of dawn, she promised never to forget the lessons of her journey. The ancestors had given her a second chance. It was up to her to make it count.